It's been about 8 years since I made my first melodic bass track. Back then, my mixes had the same problem that almost everybody else's does. They sounded thin and muddy. The drums were buried, the vocals were too quiet, and the whole thing just fell apart the moment I left my studio and listened to it in my car. 8 years later, I've got official remixes for people like Illenium, Seven Lions, Jason Ross, and AU5. I've got releases on labels like Ophelia, Seeking Blue, and Heaven Sent, and I've mentored producers who have gone from no releases at all to releases on Ophelia, Subsidia, Heaven Sent, and more. These 8 years or so have taught me a handful of mixing principles that actually matter, and I learned most of them spending years getting it wrong. While some of them are fairly simple, many of them will actually finally make your track click, make your mixes hit. In the next few minutes, I'm going to give you the 8 mixing principles that I would keep if I had to throw everything else away. The ones that take a track from almost there to actually professional. The ones that'll make you sound good whether you're listening on a Bluetooth speaker or a full-scale club system. Section 1. Use less reverb than you think you need. The vast majority of melodic bass producers severely overuse reverb, and trust me when I say that I was no exception to this. The thing that tends to surprise people the most when I tell them, hey, use less reverb, is that putting it on super saws is like one of the worst things you can do. Most producers generally reach for a reverb because they feel like the layer that they're listening to isn't big enough. They feel like if I put reverb on this thing, it's gonna make it sound huge. The problem is it often does the exact opposite, especially when there's reverb on basically everything. What too much reverb does, whether it's on a single layer or it's applied across the mix, it just creates this blurry, messy, low mid and mid-range frequency range. The more reverb you put on everything, the more noise you're adding to your entire mix. Every sound starts overlapping with every other sound, and pretty soon everything just blends into everything else and you just have a big muddy soup. One of the more important frequency ranges in melodic bass, or really any genre, is the low-mid frequency range, which sits between about 150 and 350 hertz. That's where a lot of the warmth and power comes from. Having too much reverb in that frequency range, or for that matter really any reverb in that frequency range at all, it's just going to turn it into a big mushy soup of messy frequencies. Generally, the rule that I live by is very simple. If a layer doesn't absolutely need reverb, just don't put reverb on it. And in my opinion, super saws almost never need reverb on them, especially in a melodic bass track. Let me show you guys an example. I'm going to pull up my song Infinity and show you the drop saws. This is something that I see pretty often, honestly. I see a lot of producers not only putting reverb on their super saws and on a lot of drop layers that don't need it, but I see them applying it to the bus, meaning they put it on every sound inside of that group. Here's what my super saws sound like dry. And then here's what they sound like if I apply reverb to all of them. Oftentimes, reverb can cause your sounds to become masked. It feels like they're far away. They can feel muddy. They can be missing high end. Reverb can really create a lot of problems. If a layer doesn't actually need reverb, just try to steer clear of it. Section number 2. Pair wide layers with mono layers. Now this is something that surprises a lot of producers that I talk to. We all want the biggest, widest mix we can get because after all, this is EDM. So what I typically see people doing is every single layer in their mix is just super, super wide. It's way out in the stereo field. The problem with that is if everything is really wide, then it sort of cancels out that effect, that feeling of wide that you actually get. There's simply no contrast for your ear to grab onto because everything is just sitting way out in your mix, and so everything just kind of feels like it's sitting in the same spot. Something I've learned over the years is ideally, if you want something to feel really big and wide, you need something in the center to kind of create that contrast. So you have something here and then you have something way out here to kind of contrast that. So as an example, I'm going to pull up my song Infinity again to show you guys. And so if you just check out my drop here, what I've got for the saws, I've got a wide square layer. I've got a wide saw layer. And then I've got this more mono layer. If you listen to all three together, and then you can kind of see, like, as I'm turning that gritty layer off, that's kind of my mono saw. The saws just don't feel as wide. They don't have that center kind of focal point as a point of reference to create the sense of width. So if I go and zoom in on my leads, it's basically the same thing here as well. So these top 2 layers are a little bit more mono. And then as you can hear, these bottom 4 are a little bit more on the wide side. I would argue this number 60 is actually a little bit more on the center as well. Has a little bit of center and a little bit of sides. If I play my whole lead bus, and then if I turn off these 3 kind of more center layers, you notice that not only does the drop lead stack feel more powerful and feel more full with those top 3 layers on, but the wide stuff kind of feels wider because all of a sudden you have something in front of you to compare that thing that's way out in the sides. This concept can basically apply anywhere in your song. I would say it's especially important in your drop because that's kind of the highest energy moment, but pretty much anywhere in my song, if there's going to be, let's say, some pads outside of my drop, there's probably going to be something a little more in the center, and then there's going to be something kind of way out in the stereo width. It's typically the most effective to layer mono layers with wide layers so that you create this really big sense of depth and you have the whole kind of stereo field filled in and taken care of. Section number 3, mid-side EQ the mud out of the sides of your mix. When I learned this for the first time, it was one of the most eye-opening, mind-expanding experiences that I had ever had in mixing and EQing within EDM. That might sound extreme, but when you try this for the first time and you get it right and you get that aha moment in your brain, you're just gonna go, oh. In melodic bass, as you guys know, we love to stack layer after layer after layer. You've got your super saws, you've got your leads, you've got your mid bass, you've got your res, your strings, guitars, pianos, vocals, impacts, atmospheres. That's a lot of stuff. Most of those layers carry a lot of low mid frequency between, let's say, 150 and 400 hertz, oftentimes especially around the 250 hertz range. 250 hertz is usually where the worst of that mud kind of sits. So if you left every one of those layers completely un-EQ'd, there was no mid-side cutting, no low cutting in the sides, your mix would just turn into an absolute muddy, chaotic mess. One of the most powerful moves I have ever figured out is to take a mid-side EQ and basically remove a ton of the low and low mid frequencies from the sides of your mix. The mix opens up, it feels way more clean, and everything feels far less claustrophobic and muddy. Now, there's a couple important things worth mentioning here. Just because a sound has low mid frequencies in the sides does not necessarily mean you need to go cut all of that. Not every single sound is going to have mud necessarily. Some sounds are going to be cleaner than others. This is probably going to be a fun trick for you guys once you try it out and it sounds awesome. Just careful not to go and overdo it because you actually do need low mids in the sides of your mix. The point I'm making here is try to cut out the excess, try to cut out the extra low end and low mids that we don't need that ends up sounding muddy. As an example here, these are the strings that I have in the chorus of my song. I can feel your energy. Now, if you listen to this sound with all of this low mid cut out, right? I cut everything basically around 500 hertz. So if I turn this off, you can kind of listen before and after. Same thing with this saw layer up above. Or maybe take the flume style respace that I have here. This has a lot of distortion on it and a lot of chorus on it. So these things both will sort of make a sound a little bit muddier than it would be without it. If you listen to this respace with and without this mid-side EQ, so that's the stuff I'm really talking about, right? Generally, muddiness is going to come from low mid frequencies that have a source. Let's say this respace is the source. That's either been heavily processed or there's a lot of reverb that's been added to it. In this case, the flume res, this is muddy in the sides because it has a bunch of distortion and processing on it. These strings naturally have a lot of reverb because of the way that they were recorded, and so that's a big part of why these also sound muddy in the sides. Section number 4, keep your high-end frequencies restrained outside of your drop. This one's a little bit more subtle, but this can honestly make a huge difference in the overall quality of your mix. If you've got tons of layers outside of your drop and all of them have frequency above 10 kilohertz, that's often way too much. It's gonna kill your contrast, it's gonna make your drop feel less exciting, and it's probably gonna bury your vocals. Your drop is meant to be the most exciting, most full, most high energy moment in the song. It's going to be the brightest moment in the whole song usually. If your verse, intro, and chorus all have tons and tons of high frequencies, it's generally going to make it so that the drop feels a lot less bright and a lot less exciting by comparison. Too much high end outside of your drop can really mask your vocals, and generally in melodic bass, the vocals are kind of the most important part, especially in your verse and in your chorus. Without the proper room to really sit in that 10K and above range, vocals can often feel really dull or kind of buried. I learned this lesson directly from the legend Matthew Steeper. For those of you who don't know Matthew, he is both the husband and the vocal producer for the legend Halion. We were on Zoom a few years back when I was finishing up my remix for one of Halion's tracks, and they were giving me a bit of advice on how to tweak my mix and get the remix sounding as good as possible. He pointed out that I had way too much high end in my verse and in my chorus, so Kelly's vocals were getting buried. The moment I started kind of filtering and cutting those frequencies back, all of a sudden, the vocals were way more clear and my drop felt a lot more exciting by comparison. If you take my song Infinity as an example, I'm going to play the earlier part of my song, I'm going to turn the vocals off and show you guys what the frequency spectrum looks like on span, outside the drop, and then inside the drop. If you notice when you look at this, yes, there is high end, of course, right? We don't need to completely high cut everything, but there's not very much of it. It's really quiet and it's really far down low in the frequency spectrum and in the volume. Now, if we compare that to the drop, you can just clearly see how much high end there is in my drop in this 10K range and how little there is in the verse and sort of pre-chorus areas outside of my drop. Not to say you should just high cut every layer outside of your drop completely, no high end anywhere, but the point is there's far, far less of it outside of my drop than there is inside of my drop. If you've watched this far, clearly you're not very casual about your mixing, you take it seriously. If that sounds like you, I created a freebie checklist PDF. It has all the exact frequency ranges and decibel targets, and I put it all in one place. That way you can just print it off or keep it on your desktop and reference it whenever you're doing a mix. Go grab it, it's totally free. There's a link in the description below to download it. Section 5, build mix fullness progressively throughout your song. The next principle sits underneath almost every big melodic bass song that you love. Your mix should get progressively more and more full as you go through the song towards your drop. This is not a hard rule. I'm not saying you have to do this 100% of the time. Every song is a little different. But generally, as you go from intro into verse, verse into chorus, chorus into drop, your mix is going to become more and more full. I see a lot of beginner producers make this mistake all the time. Their song begins and their whole song is already just completely full end to end. There's sub bass, there's high end, there's drums and everything else happening. And so by the time we get to the build and the drop, it just doesn't really feel exciting. The energy is already completely full. And so there's just nowhere to really go from there. When a song doesn't kind of build progressively over time in terms of its fullness, it just feels pretty flat. Every section kind of feels like it's the same density. The drop just doesn't feel satisfying by the time we get there. Let me just show you a brief example inside my song Infinity. If you look, while I play somewhere near my intro, right? Not super full. There's a ton of space for the vocals in here. So then if we move into this sort of pre-chorus area, more full, but still not as full as it could be. There's still lots of room to improve here. So then if we move into the chorus, way more full. It's a lot more high energy. There's more sub, there's more high frequency. The energy here is clearly increased. So then finally, if we listen to the drop, this is about as high energy as it can get. There's not really much more room here to fit any more layers or frequencies in there. It's basically as full and as wide as it can possibly be. As we go from intro to drop, we go from this to this to this to this. For those of you wondering, how do I achieve that difference in fullness? You have to be able to add something meaningful with each new section, which means if you want to make a progressively more full mix, just start off with a mix that's a little bit more on the empty side. Over time, you add more layers. You add a bass. In the chorus, you add some sub and some bright high end. In the drop, you have punchy, powerful drums. The sub gets louder. The super saws come in. If you want to create a mix that becomes more progressively full over time, you need contrast. And in order to have contrast, you need to be okay with certain sections of your song not being as full as they can possibly be. Section number 6. Get warmth from clean, minimally processed layers. Here's the paradox. That same range where a lot of the mud that we talked about earlier lives, 150 to 400 hertz, that's also the most important range for warmth and power. You can't just cut that frequency from every single layer and move on and call it a day. We do need frequencies in that range. The point of this section is the frequencies in that range need to be clean. Okay, so what do I mean by that? On my drop, let's take my mid basses as an example. And then listen to them one by one. If you didn't notice anything obvious that was different between those layers, let me point it out to you. This bottommost layer, this is an Anna bass pluck. Anna is a cool synth that I use for certain different sounds. The interface can look a little complicated, but basically what this is a saw wave bass pluck, and there's basically no processing on it at all. Tube drive, it's off, phasers off, all of this stuff is off. There's basically a limiter on here, and that's it. There's no other effects on this sound at all. Then if you look at the post-processing, again, nothing. The frequencies that are coming from this sound between 74, up to 250, 350, they're very clean because they're not heavily processed. If you look at these other layers up above, this bass has a saturator on it, it has an overdrive on it, and then it has a frequency splitter with even more processing on it. I cut all of the low frequencies out of this layer because at the end of the day, it's just going to be super muddy. If I turn this off, that sounds muddy. Again, compared to this layer, sounds clean and punchy. So I took the low end out of that top layer because it's muddy as a result of all of the saturation and distortion that's added to it. Same thing here. This one's not as extreme, but again, it does have overdrive and some other distortion on it. And so therefore I've taken away all the low end. Again, comparing that to our clean layer, that low end just feels so clean and warm because it's not processed. Maybe take my saws as another example. We have 3 saw layers: the squares, the wide saws, and the gritty saws in the mono. This layer and this layer have something in common, which is that they're a little bit more processed. As you can see, this bottom layer, there's lots of distortion and stuff like that on it. This top layer, there's more going on. There's some distortion, there's some hyperdimension, etc. However, this layer, which as you can see, doesn't really have much low cutting, doesn't have any processing on it at all. It's just a phaser. There's no distortion or anything really crazy happening here, and there's no post-processing, just a little bit of EQing. And so that's why this layer makes up a lot of the warmth of the saws. Section number 7. Make sure to put your mid bass and sub bass in the correct octave. Let's talk about bass again. Bass is easily one of the most important frequencies in the entire mix. And the thing is, most producers are accidentally removing the majority of it. So above your sub, you've almost always got a mid bass or a Reese bass. It should be playing somewhere between that 70 Hertz and 120 Hertz range. That's kind of the most crucial frequency range. A mix that doesn't have any frequencies in that range between 70 and 120, maybe 70 and 150, that mix is going to sound thin and hollow no matter what else you have going on. There's 2 mistakes that I see producers making very often in this category. The first is a lot of producers simply have their mid bass set to an octave that is too high, so by default it's just playing outside of that ideal frequency range. If you look at the mid basses again inside of my infinity drop, if we look at that main mid bass, the one that was sitting in the warmer part of the frequency range, when I play it on span, you notice this lowest frequency? It's sitting in that like 70, 80, 90 Hertz range. So if we go up an octave and then we do the same thing, the lowest frequency is often sitting in like that 100 Hertz range, which is generally just a little bit too high for your bass. It can go up there temporarily, but you just don't want it sitting there the whole time. Especially if we look at like this highest octave note that we have in my bass. The high point of that is sitting up into like the 110 Hertz range, so it's barely even sitting in that ideal frequency range at all. So the other mistake that I see producers make that causes their bass to sound really thin is they'll put a low cut filter on their bus or on their individual sounds, and they'll cut everything up to like 150, 200. If we do that, right, we're just completely missing that frequency range entirely. So if I turn this back off, all of a sudden again, right, lots of low end in that frequency range. The point there is it's very important not to low cut your mid basses too high. A lot of people do this because they think they need to completely leave room for the sub. In my experience, and with every song I've ever released, it's perfectly fine to let your sub and your mid basses overlap a little bit, especially in that 70 to 120 Hertz range. Ideally, with sub, you want the bottommost note of your sub to be sitting somewhere between 40 and 70 Hertz, roughly. So if we look at my sub, so as you can see, for the most part, my sub sits pretty comfortably between 40 and 70 Hertz, right? So if I go up an octave from there, right, it's going from like 80 Hertz up to 100 Hertz. It's just too high. You want your sub again to be somewhere between 40 and 70 Hertz. Section number 8. hit these targets on your kick, sub, and snare. Let's finish on the most foundational thing there is. Your kick, sub, and snare are the foundation and backbone of your entire mix. If these aren't sitting in the appropriate volume in your mix, nothing else is going to feel balanced, nothing's going to feel powerful, no matter how clean or good your EQing and layering is. So here are the numbers that I actually aim for in every mix that I've ever done. Using an Ableton Spectrum, click auto so it goes to range, set this range from 0 to -40, and then if we look at my kick and my snare, I'll just solo the drum bus. So you can kind of see, right? This is the kick right here, and this is the snare right here. My kick is sitting right around -12 dB. My snare is sitting right around -18 dB. And then if we look at my sub, that's also sitting right at -12. So kick, sub, and snare together. You can see how the sub, the kick, and the snare basically sit consistently at those numbers the whole time. Kick and sub are at -12. Snare is at -18. A couple of important caveats to keep in mind. This is inside of your drop, not outside of your drop, and this is a pre-master mix. There's no limiter, there's no master chain, there's nothing on the master channel whatsoever. So then outside of your drop, your sub, your impacts, your kicks, those should be sitting at about -18. Then the other important frequency range to keep in mind is your vocals should generally be sitting somewhere between about -18 and -24. This depends a bit on the song. There's not a hard rule. It kind of depends on if you want those more kind of pop forward Illenium style vocals versus those more kind of like trance melodic dubstep sort of Seven Lion vocals. But generally your vocals should be sitting somewhere between -24 and -18, as you can kind of see here on my spectrum. I can feel your energy. I just need some time to heal these scars. Right, and they're pretty dynamic, which is what you want with vocals, so they're going to have little peaks and spikes. But again, the majority of this stuff is sitting between -18 and -24. I'm sure there are those of you right now who are watching who don't have Ableton, and do not dismay, I have a solution for you. If you don't have Ableton, all you need to do is download Voxengo Span. Again, it's free, and then you're just going to open the settings window here in the top. And then you're just going to take these settings and just match them to this screenshot. These are the settings you want in order to make your span behave like Spectrum in Ableton. Then you can use Spectrum to measure those same frequency ranges of -12 dB for your kick and sub inside your drop, -18 dB outside of your drop, and then during your drop, snare should be sitting around -18 dB. Everywhere in your song, vocals should be sitting between -24 and -18 dB. I really can't stress the importance of this one enough, guys. One of the most important things you can do in your mix is have loud, powerful, punchy drums and sub. When your kick, your snare, and your sub are quiet, your song will never feel powerful no matter how loud everything else is. Well, those are the 8 most important mixing principles that I would recommend trying out. But mixing can only go so far if the song and the sound selection just aren't there yet. If you're still early in your journey and you're kind of still wondering what it takes to make a song sound like one of the professionals, like Illenium or Seven Lions, watch the next video that pops up on the screen here. I break down layer by layer how to make an Illenium song sound like an Illenium song. That way you can hear the principles in this video applied to a song that millions and millions of people are already listening to. I'll see you guys there.